This is Thrive Perspectives, an ever-growing discussion about the issues that shape our lives with your guides, Dr. Matthew Jacoby and DJ Payne.
Matthew, a very wise man once said that...
Was it Jesus?
No, it wasn't Jesus. Okay. Let's say it was some sort of vague...
Was it Kierkegaard?
No, let's go to India, right? Some Indian wise man. Let's paint that picture. Once said that there was a group of blind people. Yeah. And in a pen in a yard there was a majestic elephant.
Yeah, I've heard this one.
And the blind people came in, and they were asked to describe the elephant. Now,
what is it? Yeah.
What is it?
What is this thing?
What is this thing? They had no concept of an elephant because they're blind. They had no idea. One man reaches and touches the stomach and says it is like a wall. One man reaches the trunk and says it's like a huge snake. One man reaches the tusk and says it's like a spear or a hard rock. The type of thing. And then up on the balcony, looking on high, is the what do you call him? The Raj, standing up the top there, and he says, no, you can't see the whole of it. You're all describing the one thing. I know that the elephant is, you're all describing just parts of the one thing. And a lot of people would say, and that is what it's like with religions. We're just mere mortals reaching out and, describing one part of something that is bigger than what we can comprehend. And it's all just the one thing.
Yeah, that's right. So the different religions, according to that metaphor, and I've heard that before, different religions are like, one religion is like the guy grabbing the trunk and saying it's this, and the other religion is the guy grabbing the tail and saying, no, it's this, and so forth and so forth. The one key problem with those that present that view of religion is that they are taking the position of the Raj, looking down and seeing the whole thing and being able to make that pronouncement. Yeah. So they feel that they can stand outside, as it were, the whole situation, look in and make this declaration. And that is preposterous, if you ask me.
And the other, there's so many problems with that analogy, and I wanted to start this episode with that tired old analogy that I've heard many times growing up, for a lot of different things, but usually around world religion, world religions, that we're all trying to describe one thing. There are many pathways. Your pathway will lead us to, God, that type of worldview. Well, the problem, again, you've summed it up perfectly. Your worldview that you think more than these other world religions because you're just going to stand back and say that is incredibly presumptive. But it's also, in that analogy, well, we Christians or our fellow, human beings who are Buddhists or a Muslim or a Judaist, we've gone all around the elephant. We've gone to, I've gone next to, if this analogy is true, I've stood next to my Muslim friend who's holding onto the tusk, and I've gone, well, let me feel. And I've felt, and then I've gone around to the tail, and then I've gone, so I have felt the whole thing because I've looked at all the other religions, and I still go, no. This is the right way. So I guess what we want to do with this episode, Matt, is ask the question, and it's a sincere question that a lot of people have. And I think it grows out of a motivation of wanting to be nice and wanting to be accepting and loving and tolerant. Yep. What about other religions, Matt? We as Christians, how dare we say that this is the only way? Why? I mean, they're sincere. I've got a friend who's a Buddhist, and they are sincere and they love Jesus and they say nice things. And how can I say?
Yeah, well, first of all, yes, we should be accepting, loving and tolerant. That doesn't mean that we can affirm things that we fundamentally cannot agree with. Yeah. So, first of all, let's start very broadly. The fact is, there has never been a people group who have not had some religious orientation. Now, some sense of the spiritual world, let's say. Now,
and you're talking throughout the start of history, known history,
forever. So
all around the world.
Atheism is a very modern sort of thing,
and a very small, like tiny. As if you,
it's tiny. Yeah.
If you wanted to chart it in population of religion, if you made it another religion, like if you said this is another religion, atheism, or let's just say worldviews, spiritual worldviews, as far as population or percentage wise. Atheism around the world is a drop in the bucket.
It really is, and it's a relatively recent thing. The Canadian philosopher Charles Taylor, in his book A Secular Age, points out that before the so-called Enlightenment, in inverted commas, someone living in 1500, let alone all of the thousands and thousands and thousands of years before, could never have conceived or would never have even thought that there may not be a God. It was not even on the idea that there would not be a spiritual aspect to the world, that there would not be a God. It would not have even occurred to them to even doubt that.
Yep.
It was a matter of immediate
experience. You wouldn't even ask the question.
Right. Yeah, so what Charles Taylor says is that something very unique has happened through quite an artificial process, actually, of us stepping back, as it were, from reality and kind of thinking that we can look in, treating reality as like an object that we can, like the Raj,
standing up there,
stand outside. And he talks about a buffered kind of relationship that we have to reality, whereas people previously had what he refers to as a porous relationship with their environment, and then with the spiritual world. Now he's not. I don't think he's a Christian. I mean, he's describing that just as a philosopher. But
porous like a sponge. Porous.
Porous like a sponge. That's right. So, and he gives examples of, particularly in indigenous cultures, where there's probably a much higher degree of porousness.
Yes.
Where people seem to have this constant, immediate sense of perception and connection with a kind of spiritual world. Now that also can be problematic because they can live in fear and almost can be a sense of oppression with that. Mm-hmm. The answer though isn't to just doubt or to just deny that the spiritual world is real. Of course we would say that the key is that they need to be delivered from that bondage and that fear, which is exactly what Jesus came to do. But so I think as a generally it's important for us to recognise that atheism is a very modern thing, and it's a tiny little percentage. I know it gets a lot of
attention, media
attention.
Yes.
So really, what the world's religions show is that we have, as human beings, an innate awareness of the spiritual world, of the spiritual aspect of existence, and of God as well. Now, of course, as Christians, and if we're going to view this through the Christian worldview,
that's what this show's all about.
What we recognise is that, and what is pretty obvious, I think it's one of the most obvious elements of the Christian worldview, is that something went wrong. Right? Something went really wrong. The world went awry. And we refer to that as the fall of mankind. It's been, in a sense, been one long, big fall. It's like, could speak of the falling of mankind. Ever since that moment that is described in Genesis chapter 3. So what happens there is that human beings basically fall away from God and end up refashioning, I guess, these beliefs in ways that over time, in ways that allow them to transact somehow with the spiritual world, kind of have dealings with the spiritual world. Now, I want to make a connection here to the episode that we did a little while back on the spiritual world. Now, you recall in that episode, we looked at how there was this these spiritual beings, that God is not the only spiritual being. There are all these other spiritual, angelic beings, and that there was a rebellion of this in the spiritual world as well. And so these spiritual entities which were in a sense, I guess, had a hand in the maintenance of God's order in the world.
Yes.
They too rebelled, and so according to this kind of spiritual worldview, biblical worldview, we can also interpret religions from that side of realities. Well, not just from our side. So, what one scholar, Daniel Strange, who talks about religions and accounts for kind of theology of religions, he refers to different religions as a sort of idolatrous refashioning of an originally innate divine, sense.
Yes.
Okay. So that's from the human side.
Yeah.
Whereas from the spiritual world side, one could say that actually there is a kind of demonic realm, these rebellious spiritual beings who are actually drawing, in a sense...
manipulating that innate desire within a human
manipulating
being.
that innate desire, but they're doing this because, in a sense, they want to be like God. That's they want to take the place. They want to be gods in that sense. Okay, so that kind of accounts for that side of things as well. It's also when we read the Bible and it talks about the gods of the nations, we can also, I think, quite fairly assume that there are actually real spiritual entities behind these religious systems.
Exactly, I
which
agree.
is why they're often very oppressive and don't lead people. It's often, they lead people to fear and very onerous and oppressive systems. Now, straight away, there'll be people, if I've got, there are Hindus out there or Buddhists, they would say, no, that's not true, and that's a conversation that we'll move into that.
Yeah.
If we get time.
So that sort of gives us a sort of our Christian perspective of why. Yeah. There is multiple religions. I think the other thing is, to begin with, we step back and we just, again, there's, literally tens of thousands of religions that we can looking at, but the major groups of it, and this is a really interesting thing as well, is when you step back and look at world religions and some of the conversations I've had with people who want to argue, how do you know the right one? Or why is there so many religions? Or, you Christians with your claim of truth, how ridiculous is this? Because some of them will say, well, listen, we know that the earliest recorded writings about religion are usually around Hinduism. I mean, Hinduism can trace its history right back, 5,000 years to the beginning of written civilization. You Christians, you just trace your origins back 2,000 years to the time of Christ, and we can say, well, we stand on the back of the
that's right.
The Jews. But even then, they will say, well, their writings only go back maybe 2,000 years before Christ. The Hindus are way before that. Buddhism's not that far, behind as well. That's in that same region. But then there's another side of argument saying, well, you guys got it all wrong. All these ancient religions wrong. It's the newer religions that are right. Yeah. Islam. Their major claim is that Muhammad, Allah came to Muhammad and said, all of them have got it wrong. It's time for me to give you the right one. Yeah. And that was just 1,400 years ago. Yeah. Sikhism is 500 years old.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So there's all these different arguments about the ages and where they're from and cultural different things.
Yeah.
How would you answer that?
Well, the age of the writings themselves isn't really the main thing, because a lot of these religions, there's something problematic about the word religion. Yeah. I mean, it's difficult to even identify what is it actually referring to, because there are things that get called religion that, there are things grouped under that it's hard to see what they have in common. Yes. But I would say...
I know what you're saying. It's one of those things like, and it goes back to that thing where, listen, the essence of all these religion worldviews are the same. You all sort of have good things about God to say and everything like that, and it's sort of all the same. But then I turn around and go, you can't even be grouping all of these things into the one category.
They're actually so different. So that's a little issue with the word religion. But for example, in the the biblical tradition, before anything was written down, you've got a long oral tradition as well.
Yes.
Hinduism is an interesting creature, and again, I'll just say something about that because it's generally credited to have the oldest, to be the oldest.
Yep.
And it's interesting creature because it has retained all of the elements. It's like it's just kept adding, it just kept building on, and so you have thousands of gods, for example. So you get that initial, and anthropologists talking about, well, what you might refer to as animistic cultures, or in inverted commas, primitive cultures. They talk about the this sense of the spirit world and the attribution of divinity to to things, and but a sense of connection with a kind of spiritual world there. But it's very much local spirits.
Yes.
It's like the spirits down at the river.
Yes.
Or the spirit in the tree.
Yep.
There, or the spirit, they talk about spirits in animals and, all sorts of things like that. And you can sort of see, again, looking at this through a biblical worldview with this idea of the fall. And I think one of the ways in which the biblical worldview actually exhibits its superiority, I would say, is in its account of evil and the solution for it.
Yes.
Of evil and where things went wrong.
Yep.
And the solution. It's a big one.
Amen.
Okay. So
Amen.
through the lens of the biblical worldview that sees where things went wrong, we can see that. Okay, yes, because see, we're not saying, oh, that's all false. We're saying, no, actually, there are spirits.
Yeah.
But these are demonic spirits that are deceptive and that are kind of playing God in this sense, And so the idea of this evolution of, these spirits and this spirit there, and so you get this evolution of all of these different gods, and then it's interesting within Hinduism as you get this consciousness of a very vague consciousness of an ultimate. It seems to have been there from the start,
yes.
But this consciousness of this sort of ultimate divinity that they refer to as Brahman, but that is also identified with the natural world. So you get this, you get this connection between, I suppose, that kind of animistic sense of attributing divinity to things,
yes.
like the sun and the moon and this tree or that mountain or something. So that kind of develops into this idea that there is this sense of something, an ultimate God, that's this innate sense, but then this identifying all of these things as sort of a kind of incarnation of that God.
Almost like a pantheistic type of thing.
Yeah, that's right. So that's pantheism.
Yeah.
And then you can say that all of these other gods are really just sort of avatars of Brahman. Yeah. And that even that we are actually a sort of and within Hinduism there are different schools of thought about whether we have true individuality or whether we are just aspects of Brahman. Yeah. And to some extent Hindus would say yes, we are aspects of Brahman, but some would say no, even when our soul leaves the body, some Hindus would say it just goes back into Brahman, whereas others would say no, we retain our individual identity. Anyway, there's some, but you can see some difference there. But you can see how that could have evolved, even from a biblical worldview, looking and seeing how, okay, there's this vague sense of an ultimate God, but you can see how, and particularly in Romans chapter 1, where Paul says, they worshipped and served created things rather than the Creator. Yeah. So there's this identification of things as, of God with things. So that's an interesting. I think Hinduism is one of the more interesting religions, I find, in the way that it's the sort of multiplicity within it. It gives it a kind of a snapshot of the evolution of sort of fallen humanity.
Yeah. Trying to work it out.
Because it's so ancient. Yeah, that's right.
Because it's so ancient.
Now they would look. I mean, that they would say again. No, actually, Hinduism is a wonderful path to peace, and look, there are aspects of it's not all bad. There are aspects of Hinduism and mental discipline and things that can like techniques that can be are worthy, but there's actually a much deeper problem with all of this, because ultimately Hinduism is also a classic example of human beings trying to save themselves. So it's very explicit that it shows a pathway to salvation, but it's very, very difficult, and ultimately to escape these cycles of rebirth and reincarnation. I mean, you really have to become a high level, a spiritual person that you almost have to retreat from just do that. It's the funny conversation. Like I've heard, and again, it comes up quite often, even these days. Some really woke progressive people might say, "Listen, the problem with you Christians is that nowhere in the Bible does it denounce slavery." Paul never denounced slavery, or fill in the blank, whatever the thing that people want to complain about. And again, I don't want to get into that argument. I can see you, Matt, wanting to argue about that. But the funny thing is, I once had a conversation around that with someone who had studied really in-depth Hinduism, came out of it. And they were like, you don't accuse us Hindus of that, because our Hindu religion, like slavery and the caste system, and lower and thing is like, for a lot of us, it's inbuilt into the universe. Like, it's like something that's really important. But it's funny, they only accuse Christians, of other religions don't get the accusations that some of us Christians get. I think that's right. That's the point I was trying to make. Yeah. So, I mean, these are some, and of course, one of the key steps towards salvation is this idea of duty. In Sanskrit, it's the word dharma, which is this idea that you do your duty. In fact, probably the scripture of scriptures in Hinduism, you've got the Vedas, you've got the Upanishads, which is the more philosophical kind of literature. Vedas are more poetic, and then you've got the Bhagavad Gita, and the Bhagavad Gita is really interesting. In the way that it sets up this discussion between Krishna and Arjuna, Arjuna is a warrior and he's about to go into battle against some people who are kind of his kin, and he doesn't want to. He's lamenting all the bloodshed, and Krishna is saying, it's interesting because Krishna is saying, no, you are a warrior. It's like your caste. And you must do your duty without any view to consequences, or it's all about doing your duty.
And that by duty,
your dharma.
And that concept of duty, tell me if I'm wrong, Matt, but what I've understood in reading and researching and talking to people about it, that concept of duty is not just, doing the best thing. It's like, no, what were you born in to do? What is your lot in life?
Yeah.
Do that.
Yeah, that's right.
Type of thing.
Yeah, the Hindus would be quick to argue, though, that the concept of caste as you're born and you can't, you must do that and you're born that way and you can't move between castes, they would argue that that's a later, sort of a later addition.
Development.
I mean, something that has really become part of the system, but they would argue that wasn't the original idea. The original idea was just about an orderly society and everyone doing their duty, and they would have said that originally it was, there was the possibility of moving between those. Anyway, so there's a debate there going on there. But the interesting thing is, when been to India 3 times, and with World Vision, and one of the things that the World Vision crew there recognise is that to pull people out of poverty, you have to change mindsets, and so you have to change a poverty mindset. And one of the key things that they recognise is that actually Hinduism set up a kind of bondage actually over these people because of the sense of, I've got to work out I've got to save myself, I've got to I've got to perform my dharma,
Yeah.
and I've got to, sort of stay where I am, because they're dealing with the lowest of the low.
Yeah.
So there isn't much hope for in this life actually moving anywhere. It's all about the next life, and so that for them was really a key blocker. So one of the things that they have to inevitably, I mean, I know we have this idea of like, oh no, just let people believe what they want to believe.
Yeah.
But actually what I learned from the World Vision team is that it is actually impossible to lift these people out of poverty unless there's some challenging of those elements of their worldview.
Wow.
Now they don't, I mean, they're going to be very careful how they do this. And so they sort of erode some of those elements and almost in a practical sense, no, you can move up. And by, they want to, it's great the way that they do it, because they invest in some key people who they feel like are the up and comings, that this person has the motivation to move up, and they become sort of in their community
community leaders.
They become community leaders. People look to them and say, oh, well, they did it, so I can do it too. So
now, before anybody begins, before the crowd chimes in and says, "You white privileged colonial evil human being coming over there," no,
they were all locals.
Exactly. That's the point.
They were all locals doing that.
Yeah, the World Vision team comes out of the local areas. It is people within their own communities dealing with this.
Yeah, that's right. So it was interesting to see the difference. This idea in the Christian worldview, which was completely countercultural when it was introduced in the early Christian movement and introduced in the New Testament, the idea that all are equal: man, woman, Jew, Gentile, slave, free.
Yep.
It was completely countercultural. No one believed that at the time,
Exactly.
So, I mean, in a sense, not even some of the most revered sort of thinkers at the time. I mean, Plato, for example, has his Republic in Plato's Republic, basically a version of the caste system. He has three castes.
Yes.
The producers, the military caste, and the leader caste. Yeah. And so he's actually advocating something that is pretty much what we see there in the Hindu caste system.
Yeah.
So I think, so for example, that I think brings us to a really key difference. As we look at, this is the case with Hinduism, but it's the case pretty much across the board. The key difference between Christianity and the other religions is this idea that God has come to us and has secured our salvation in the person of Jesus Christ.
Yes.
And we don't have to earn it. We must live it out and take hold of it and live in faith. So it's a choice. Do we want to live in this? But we don't have to earn this. We don't earn our own salvation. God saves us. And in a sense, we begin with the full love and favour of God. We begin that way. We don't win it, but we begin. That concept of grace, which is undeserved favour from God, undeserved favour most elsewhere in other religions and thought systems. Before Christianity would have thought that was just absurd, ridiculous idea.
Yeah, that concept, the verse that we have.
It's completely unique to Christianity.
The verse that we have in the Bible in the New Testament, like, while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us, and we were loved and chosen before, we were even created. That whole concept is like new. That's a new, as far as, when it comes to, the Judaic, Christian concept that we've got out of there compared to other religions. That's so foreign.
Yeah, that's right.
That's so foreign that this God would come to us and had chosen us and wanted us, whereas a lot of the other religions is the striving, the groping, the hoping for enlightenment. If you follow these things, you may get enlightened in this particular way.
Yeah, that's right. Then, so if we go, so that's the oldest. Let's go to the biggest younger, which is Islam, and I think at some point we have plans to do an episode
dedicated to Islam.
Dedicated to Islam. We're going to try and get an expert on that.
Great expert.
A colleague of mine at the Melbourne School of Theology, which hopefully we can get that happening. The thing with Islam is that Muhammad claims to be the ultimate prophet. So there's an acknowledgement of Moses and Jesus,
of all the
Moses
a lot of the
prophet,
biblical, a lot of
biblical prophets acknowledges that's all, but says, but all of that went wrong, including Christianity, and so Muhammad is the ultimate prophet. So, Jesus, in a sense, is a sort of step in just toward Muhammad. Now, the problem, to me, there's a very sort of obvious problem with this when you compare Muhammad and Jesus.
Yeah.
And, and Muslims have, the hadith, the kind of life, which is the life of Muhammad, which is, as Muhammad is held up as an example, as well as the Quran, which is the laws. So the problem here is when you compare, because we also would say that Jesus is the ultimate revelation of who God is and what God wants.
Yes.
Now, I would challenge, and I do challenge any non-Christian person to read through the gospel and read the life and teaching of Jesus and tell me, find a criticism of this, because it's actually there really is. In fact, I often say I don't think you can read a gospel and it not impact you. I mean, it can harden your heart, but there is something really amazing going on here.
Yes,
in the life and teaching of Jesus. When, however, you look at the life of Muhammad, I find it quite horrific in many respects. I mean, the bloodshed, he was a military leader, quite a ruthless military leader.
Yep.
Now, some people would say, yes, but Moses didn't, Moses invaded. Yes, but that was a necessary evil for the time. And we're not saying that Moses is the ultimate expression of what God wants and who God is.
He's not our example to live by. Yes.
That's right. So the comparison has to be between Jesus and Muhammad. Famously, Muhammad married a 9-year-old girl. And
And had multiple wives. Had many wives.
And look, it's just I just feel there's just no comparison there. So I think this is the most obvious problem going on here. Also, I think the fruits of in terms of the what those systems have created.
Yes.
The early Christian movement was. But before it went wrong and started taking up the sword,
yes,
which is basically the way that Islam spread, pretty much at the point of the sword in those early periods, Christianity was really at the wrong end of the sword, under severe persecution. Practiced love your enemy, pray for those who persecute you, and even under that persecution. It spread in a very grassroots manner and actually had an amazing positive effect in terms of caring for the sick and the poor. And it created, it infused a sort of conscience into society that wasn't really there before. So in many respects, because Islam and Christianity, you can sort of... Historically, we can see those things growing side by side. I think the problematic elements in Islam are highlighted in that comparison.
In the history, in the history, if you go back. All right, so that's a quick overview of a couple of the big religions there, from a Christian worldview. Hey, Hey there, family. It's your old buddy DJ here, and sound the alarms. Fire off the fireworks. Get the crowds cheering because it's all happening. The Sons of Korah app is finally out. Yeah, that's right. Now, for some of you who are new to the Thrive family, and you might be new to Matthew Jacoby, you've known him here on the podcast as someone who's a doctor of philosophy, a theologian and Bible scholar, someone who's passionate about God, but you might not be aware that he is also the lead singer and the guy behind the band Sons of Korah. Now, Sons of Korah has been an Australian Christian band putting the Psalms to music for about 25 years, maybe even a little bit over that now. And finally, the guys have got their own app out in the App Store. In the App Store for both iPhone and for your Androids, wherever you find your app, you can find the Sons of Korah app there. If you're brand new to Sons of Korah, this is a great way and a free way to get your ears and your mind and your eyes across the music, the videos, even some of the writings from the group Sons of Korah. Now, for free, you can get all these, wonderful things. There's 25 years worth of music, and the music is fantastic. If you think Matt's good behind the microphone talking about Jesus and God, sometimes you need to hear him sing it as well. But if you want to, and you're a supporter of Sons of Korah, this is a simple way that you can subscribe in the app to become a tangible supporter. Now, if you're anything like me, you love music and you love the music industry and you want to support the artists that mean a lot to you. And that's why I'm so excited that we can put this app out there so you can directly support the band Sons of Korah. You can go in for a quarterly subscription. It's really cost effective. And when you become a subscriber, you become a supporter of Sons of Korah, you get access to all of their music, a whole bunch of exclusive music, videos, blog entries, and coming very soon, we've got some more goodies coming for you in the app for those supporters there. I'm super excited to let you know about this brand new app from Sons of Korah. And over the coming weeks, I'll let you know some more features about it. But you can find the links to the Sons of Korah app in the show notes. So if you head over to the show notes of the of this particular episode, you'll find the links there. You'll also find the links at Sons of Korah. That's Korah, Sons of Korah, KORAH.com. If you go to sonsofkorah.com, you'll find the links there. Look, get in there, support. You might even see me over on the forums in there enjoying the app myself. Very excited. This is a great moment, and as someone who supports the ministries that we do, this is another way to support the extended family, as it were. All right, that's enough from me. Let's get back into this Thrive Perspectives episode as we look at world religions. I think we were talking about the Islamic faith here on Thrive Perspectives. One of the things that we want to sort of fight against, and I've heard it even in the church, is the very worldly sort of, I would even say, bourgeois type of attitude of, well, we're all, it's all the same. It's as far as thinking goes, it's pluralism. It's basically saying, listen, you're just calling this man calls him Allah, you call him God, this person it's all the same thing. We've gone back to the beginning of the illustration. It's all the same thing, a real pluralism. Can that view, can a pluralistic view of world religion stand at all in the light of Scripture?
No. The short answer is no, it can't, because the pluralist, the big problem with the pluralist sort of thesis, again, is that someone's got this outside view. They actually don't lead to the same, they really don't lead to the same place. I mean, and there is complete difference. If indeed God, the ultimate creator God, has made a way of salvation in Jesus Christ, something that we couldn't achieve, then we're not even saying anything like what the other religions are saying. They're all saying this is how you can work your way to salvation.
Yes.
Christians are saying you can't do that.
Yeah.
And I would say that God is saying you can't do that. And I think it makes a lot of sense that we can't do that, that if it's going to happen, God has to do that. And he has done that in Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
But to me, the pluralistic thesis it's just too general. I think what it wants to acknowledge is that there is a sort of this kind of universal sense of God. But what's the point of that?
It almost, I mean, to make it a really bad analogy here, but it's almost like someone saying, for me, there's a concept of food.
Yeah.
Well, all food is food. Yeah. So you're all the same. It doesn't matter if you're eating an onion or you're eating a cake. It's all just food. Or, all sport is sport. Sport is a concept of sport. Or all sport is human beings striving to win a game. So it doesn't matter if you're playing ping pong or you're playing rugby, football. Yeah. It's all sport. It's a bad analogy, I know, but it's almost the same sort of mentality of saying, hey, religion is religion. It doesn't really matter. It's all the same.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, it's even more different to that. Yeah. I think in the sense that they are literally trying to do quite different things. They're trying to achieve. They're not trying to do different things, but the ways in which they do it, because there's a sense of trying to resolve this sense of conflict with God, trying to fulfill the meaning of life, in a sense. Okay. Yep. But the ways in which they do that are so vastly different. Yeah. And I would suggest quite contradictory. That they can't all be true. They just simply can't all be true because of those vast differences. Now, what I'm not saying is that everything that that they're wrong about everything. I think that's very important to recognise. They're not wrong about everything.
Now, this is where some people, some of our beloved Christian friends, are going to really stumble over this point. Yeah. They're going to say, Matthew, how you can't say it's all bad. Like, you don't look into the Hindu faith for any truth because there's no truth there. Don't look into the Buddhists for any writing. There's no, whatever comes out of that is going to be tainted. Whatever comes out of other religions is going to be tainted. Don't go there. There's no truth there. It's all bad.
Yeah, well, there's two. That's saying two things. Yeah. One is, do we encourage people to, read the Upanishads or the Bhagavad Gita or the Buddhist writings? Well, no, not really. I mean, there's too much. I think there's the mix of there are truths there. But the foundation on which they built is an unreliable foundation. I put this as cautiously as I can. So I don't go encouraging people, Christians, to do that. Yeah. But also I've done a bit of that myself, and I have found things. For example, in Buddhism that descriptions of sort of compassion or our need to, I guess, show compassion. While I disagree with why, I've appreciated the descriptions. I've appreciated the sense of discipline and the need for mental discipline. I've got a lot, I've acknowledged. Yep, there's some good stuff there. By the way, Buddhism is an offshoot of Hinduism, really. So that let's just map that.
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
So it's an offshoot of Hinduism.
Born out of the India, like that hotbed of India region.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
and then moving into Asia.
Now, I mean, so for example, there are there are things that have come out of these traditions. Like, for example, yoga is one that has come out, which is a form of sort of physical
worship,
physical discipline. Well, it's
depending on what strain you want to.
Because it's been secularized in a sense, and this is where you sort of need to be careful when you go to yoga class, the extent to which they buy into the religious aspects of it. You know what I mean? Because you can, in one yoga class, it can just be. It's a stretching class, and it's actually a good exercises, and there's a long tradition of that, and it's good, and then. And yet then you'll have another one where you're chanting and doing all sorts of other things. Yeah. So I think you've got to be careful there. The other thing, so that's yoga. I mean, that's come out of that. So what I'm saying is that there's some good stuff there.
Yes.
But there's a lot of other stuff that can be mixed in with it that's problematic.
Yep. Then
another example is meditation and mental discipline. Now this isn't unique to Hinduism. I believe there's a really legitimate Christian form of meditation, being still, so forth. It's a massive part of the Christian tradition.
Yes,
going back to the early monastic traditions and so forth. But of course, mindfulness, as we now know it in our culture,
is a secular version.
which was popularized in back some decades ago in John Kabat-Zinn's "Wherever You Go, There You Are." I think that was the name of the book. Can't remember the name. I did read the book, but anyway. I mean, John Kabat-Zinn makes the argument that mindfulness is something that anyone of any belief can practice, and there's yes, in some sense, and yet there's a few issues there.
Yes.
There can be issues there as well, particularly because one of the ideas that I guess is at the foundation of that is this idea of the human soul, or the Atman, recognizing that there is no self. It's like the emptying of yourself. Yeah. It's like the complete dissolution of the self, of your, and becoming one with Brahman in the sense that your individuality is completely lost.
Yeah.
Not individualism. Let's get rid of sort of a modern lifestyle individualism. I'm talking individuality, which is something that is affirmed in the biblical worldview.
Yes.
That we are individuals. And now I said that there is a stream in Hinduism that still wants to hold on to an element of individuality. Yeah. But mindfulness in its original form had this idea of the dissolution of the individual identity.
Yeah.
The becoming of nothing. And, the sense is, like, there's always legitimate aspects to this, because there is a sense in which, because a big part of my prayer life is sitting still and, in a sense, sitting in my need for God.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not emptying. So, I am. There is a kind of emptying, but with a view to being filled with the Spirit of God, and being filled with the sense of my need for God, being filled with a sense of my God-given identity. It's a different kind of thing, and yet there's still a sense of sort of a sense of becoming nothing. And this is where I sense that there's an intuitive thing in the original form of this idea of Atman becoming Brahman, and there is this sense that there's something false about our identity.
Yeah.
But what they do is they get rid of the whole thing.
Yes.
And deny completely that there is an identity.
Yeah. Instead of saying,
because they don't have the sort of infrastructure, the kind of worldview infrastructure that includes the idea of a fall.
Yeah. And says your identity, you do have identity, it's really broken.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
You've got sin to deal with. There's and it goes, the original sin traces right back to this.
Yeah, that's right.
There's an answer here, and God wants to meet you in this.
That's right. Yeah. So in a sense, a lot of this comes out of valid intuition.
Yeah.
This intuition that there's something I've got to get rid of. Okay. And when I, as I sit before God and for me, it's like, talk about being porous before. It's about me becoming porous, like a sponge.
Yep.
And I as I sit still with God, it's like a sponge when you sit it on top of water. It just sits there, it floats for a while, but gradually it draws up the water and it sinks in, and it becomes weighty with the water, and yet it floats weightlessly. And that is what I feel like, this sense of waiting on and being filled with the Holy Spirit and sitting in my absolute need of God. It's like I'm a black hole of need that draws the reality of and the presence of God, so I get the idea of becoming nothing in a sense. So it's like I connect with that, but it's like, oh yeah, you kind of, and this is the thing. There's enough truth in these religions, like it's intuitively true in a sense, and this is why it's so powerful. And
that's a really important part, Matt, here, especially for us who've been raised Christians and raised knowing the truth, and we've got a solid understanding of the Scripture and the correct way of thinking. We can sometimes come across, and I want to be careful how I say this, and I think you've really painted a beautiful way of doing it.
Yeah,
we can come across really arrogant.
Yeah,
and saying, "Well, it's wrong," and it's like, "Well, hang on a minute." You have to be able to be human enough to say, I understand where
it's much more nuanced. Yeah,
there's something there that you're reaching out to.
Yeah.
Find out why. You're going to be much more effective if you're talking to someone who's of a different religion. Find out why and what makes it beautiful for them and what they enjoy out of it.
Yeah.
And if you can speak to that and bring Jesus to that, you're really going to...
that's right. And that's actually a good segue to where what I think we need to talk about is our response to other religions.
Yes.
And because, we see Paul, for example, in Acts 17, encounter Greek religion.
Yeah.
Talk about polytheism and all the different gods and a sense of even an unknown ultimate God.
Yeah.
And he encounters this, and he works with that. In a sense, he affirms that. You're very religious people. So they're not wrong about everything. Yeah. And again, I think this is an important view. I often say other religions aren't wrong about everything. They're just irrelevant to the main thing.
Yeah.
And the main thing is how that there has been a fall, and I think the biblical story accounts best for the way things are.
Yes.
There has been a fall. We have fallen away from God. We cannot save ourselves. God needs to save us, and He has. Yeah. He has in Jesus Christ. And so, it's not that they're wrong about everything. It's just they're irrelevant to them. They're irrelevant to the main thing, which is giving me grace. The grace of God. Now, I mean, other religions speak about grace in a slightly different sense.
Yes.
I mean grace in the sense of the undeserved favor of God given to me in Jesus Christ. So I think that's important, that nuance. Otherwise, honestly, we are to, if you invalidate everything in what another person is saying, you've got no platform to build on. Actually, the beauty is that there is a lot of an intuitive reaching out for something. There is something that, and we see this, Paul demonstrating this and building a bridge from the valid elements of that Greek kind of worldview to the biblical faith.
And to build on that, what you're saying when you're invalidating, I've done this in the past where I've been really headstrong in my Christian faith and what the Bible says, and you invalidate what this person believes. Well, you're invalidating them.
Yeah.
You're basically saying everything you've put your hope and trust in is, and we want to get there. We want the Lord to bring them to a place where they can say this is wrong and Jesus' way.
Yeah.
But you're not going to do that by just slashing it down. Most of the time, you're not going to do that by just slashing it all down, because you're really slashing down a large part of who they are.
Yeah.
So as Christians living in the world today and having friends who have all these different types of religious worldviews and different religions and, diversity in our culture and stuff like that, what's the view? I mean, we've said pluralism is wrong, as in saying, hey, it's all pointing to God. Well, that doesn't fit, right? That's not right. So what is the right view?
So there are two within evangelical circles, and pluralism is something that you'll find in, like, some what I would call liberal Christians would advocate that. Now, liberal Christians are the kind of it's a bit of a make it up yourself approach. Yep. Sort of, I'm a Christian because I'm sort of into Jesus, but I'll sort of define who Jesus is, and it's not, whereas what I'm just describing as evangelical Christianity, apart from all the political connotations when you say that these days, I'm talking about those that base their beliefs basically on biblical foundation.
Yes.
Okay. So there are basically two different approaches and some sort of slight differences within these. There's what you would call an inclusivist approach and an exclusivist approach.
Okay.
The exclusivist approach, maybe we'll start there. The exclusivist approach says that there is people cannot be saved. No, actually, let's start with inclusivism.
Okay. We'll do that one.
The idea of inclusivism is recognizing that religions, the other faith systems, that there is a sense of, because of there are elements of truth in that.
Yes.
That that there is a kind of preparatory role, in a sense, that they can play. There's a sense in which Christianity fulfills the key aspirations in those religious systems. Okay.
Yes.
And that even in cases, an inclusivist would say, let's say you've got someone in a culture in somewhere where the gospel has never gone there, and they're, I don't know, a Hindu or whatever. Yep. And like the inclusivist wants to allow for the fact that God can operate in their life, even perhaps even despite, perhaps through the valid elements of their faith, and perhaps despite the invalid and the problematic elements, that God can still save that person based on what Jesus Christ has done. So they can only be saved because Jesus Christ has made it possible for a holy God to save sinful human beings. But they can, so even if they haven't explicitly heard about Jesus, it's allowing for the fact, God is, he can still, so in this story, save that person.
Yeah. So in this story, the Hindu person is, who has never heard the gospel. Yeah. This is, whatever, thousands of years ago, or even today in a remote region. They've never heard about Jesus Christ. They don't know anything about any other religion other than theirs, but they believe that there is a God. They believe that the God is loving. They believe that God has provided everything. Yeah. There's a real naturalistic worldview type of thing. And they have come through, with a lot of asterisks, the good parts of their religion has woken them up to the fact that they can't save themselves, and they have to rely on this God, whatever they call the God,
sense,
to somehow save them in the afterlife. Now, the inclusive person says, well, God's not going to ignore that heart.
Yeah, well, and it's more allowing for the sovereignty of God.
Yes.
That in the sovereignty of God, we don't want to limit what God will do. We don't want to put limitations
God's the ultimate
around
judge.
Yeah,
God
because
will
people
judge.
say, well, what about the person who's never ever heard? I mean, what about the child that is the stillborn child, or the and the inclusivist wants to say that God can save them because of what Jesus Christ has done. Whether and it's not discounting the importance of people hearing the gospel.
Yes,
because people need to be delivered and delivered from the deceptive elements.
Okay,
people need the salvation of Jesus Christ so that they can believe in Christ and be saved. Okay, so there's still an imperative there, right? Because there's still this sense that people are in bondage to these false systems, and need to be delivered from that. Okay, and ultimately are in bondage to sin. Okay. And through Jesus Christ can be set free through the preaching of the gospel. Okay. So there's still inclusive is still there's still an urgency there. So then in inclusivism, but the point is they just want to allow for the fact that God, where there hasn't been that, where the gospel hasn't reached there yet, or where that, you know what, God, because of what Jesus Christ, God is sovereign and He can still save those people.
Yes.
Now I think that would be probably the majority view. There is a form of inclusivism that is more. There's a sort of a cautious end.
And then there's a universal,
and there's something that's a bit closer to a universal, kind of universal end, where on one end you'd have people say, "Oh no, actually, if those people faithfully follow that religion, they'll be saved." Yeah, it's like Karl Rahner, the Catholic theologian, for example, was a proponent of that view. It's like that's kind of problematic. But then you've got a cautious end. For example, C.S. Lewis would be at that end. So, that's probably it's probably a fairly majority view, that one. Then you've got what's known as an exclusivist position, and the
so that was inclusive. That was
inclusivism. Yep. Oh, by the way, there's an important form of inclusivism, because it's a bit of a spectrum, known as particularism.
Okay.
It's getting
we're getting fractured down.
But it's like a sort of nuanced form of this. It's a qualifier that's made actually by Alistair McGrath, the theologian Alistair McGrath, who points out that really we need to recognise that the differences in religion, and recognise the particularity of Jesus Christ. So he's doing that to really nail it to the cautious end and away from the universal end. Okay. So that's McGrath's particularism. The point that he makes there has been great, because it's really nailed. Yeah. I think it's highlighted the importance of the cautious end of inclusivism. Okay. Yep. And it's sort of set a solid place there. Where I think that's the end. We certainly want to be on that end. Exclusivism, because we've talked about inclusivism in its slightly different forms.
Yes.
Exclusivism is the view that no one can be saved except through an explicit knowledge of Jesus Christ. Yeah. So they would say that unless you actually confess with your mouth that Jesus Christ and believe in your heart, I mean, the Bible says then you will be, again, inclusivists would say, but that doesn't mean that doesn't shut the door on other things that God may want to do. But they would say no, unless you do that, you cannot be saved at all. So there is, so in a sense, both the inclusivist and the exclusivist are saying there is one way to salvation. Pluralism is saying there are many ways to salvation.
Yes.
Okay? Inclusivists and exclusivists saying there's one way to salvation.
And it is Jesus Christ.
That's right. Exclusivists say that no one can be saved unless they have heard and understood the gospel and confessed that Jesus is Lord.
Yes.
Okay. Whereas inclusivists would say, yes, that's really, there's a real urgency around that, but we just want to allow for the fact that God may save people through the mechanisms even of the valid elements of other religions, working with what they have, when they've never heard, they've never had an opportunity.
Let's give one of DJ's really bad analogies here to wrap it up, and we can correct it as we go. We as Christians with a Christian worldview would say, well, let's start with the pluralistic worldview. Many religions, there's many doors. Yeah. All the doors are different religions. Yeah. And all of those doors, once you open those doors, you know what? It leads to the same ocean. It leads to the same place in the sky. That's the pluralistic worldview, the doors of the religion. We as Christians say there's only one door, and that door is Jesus Christ and what he's done on the cross. there's many ways to get to that one door. You can get to that door for many different pathways will lead you to that door, and you can open that door, but it's the door of Jesus Christ. The inclusive, let me see if I've got this one. The inclusive person might come to that door by accident or by desiring to have a concept that there is such a door, doesn't know the word Jesus Christ, doesn't know the concept, doesn't know the word, but has a concept of this and stumbles through that door. The exclusivist says, no, unless you can understand the language of the door and what the door represents, you can't walk through it.
Yeah. I think...
Is that a bad analogy?
No. I think there is. I think that's good.
Okay.
See, I keep thinking of complexity in all the ways that I want to sort of footnote that, but I think that's basically right.
And a big part of this, I remember when I was at Bible college, we had big discussions about this, because I had my Old Testament lecturer was a hardcore, like way far end exclusivist, to the point where he would say, his classic line. We had an argument one day in class because I knew where he was going, and we ended up having this argument, and the students all got involved. It was pretty funny. He ended up saying, because I was arguing for a mild inclusive, that God is judge, and it came down to the innocence of children. And his famous line in that class was, if what you're saying is true, we Christians should be marching on the front line of pro-abortion rallies. Abortion is the greatest way to God. If you are truly an inclusivist, type of thing. And that was where the class melted down. It was like, oi, type of thing. But that's how extreme he was in the way that he thought, black and white like that. Yeah. Because I was arguing, no, the innocent would go to heaven. We see that, I believe we see that in Scripture. I believe that at whatever that age of innocence, that God decides that, that person is guilty. Is different for every person, all that type of stuff. And he would have none of it. It was black and white in his world. Unless you name the name of Jesus Christ and you understood what he did for you on the cross, you will not enter heaven. Yeah.
And I think the problem there is just limiting what and how God will do things. Like, I've heard stories of people having visions of Jesus that had never even heard about. Yes. And yet Jesus appears to them, and God can, ideally, God has ordained that they should hear, and that the spread of the gospel through. We are responsible for that, and and let's not downplay the urgency of that. Right, there is a real urgency for that. Okay, but we need to, I guess, allow for the fact that. God is God, and let's not draw sort of these. Let's not box God into a certain way of doing things.
Amen.
Even though there is, we're clearly told this. We need to make disciples. We need to, the gospel, good news needs to go out. That's not to limit God in any way. And so I think that's the point of wisdom there. So, it's a fine point, but it's an important point. And look, I think overall, the phenomena of religion, I find it a really interesting phenomenon. I think just as a sort of a closing thought, I think the prevalence of that worldwide, for me, as I experience it, and wherever I've travelled and I experience this, it highlights to me that there is something so real behind this. Now, it can be real, insidious real behind those, the various gods or whatever, but there's a real spiritual reality, behind this. And as I read some of the sacred scriptures and I think, wow, there is this deep consciousness in human beings, albeit distorted, of God and of things not being right and of things being needing to be made right, and it highlights the reality for me of the truth, but it also highlights the reality of the problem and the way that human beings feel that problem, and I have experienced an amazing state of peace from that problem, from that nagging guilt, that inner conflict, that sense that something's not right between me and God, a peace from needing to strive to achieve that. And I found that in Jesus Christ. If without Jesus Christ, all we have is striving, conflict, I've got to do it, I can never be assured, or a distant God out there somewhere. In Jesus Christ, God comes to us. He takes hold of us. He saves us. And all we need to do is entrust ourselves into his hands. That's faith. That's what it means to believe in Jesus Christ, is entrust yourself to him and walk with him. And we can live in peace. And I find religious systems are ultimately made to compensate for the absence of God and that sense of conflict with God. Which is why in some senses I don't think of what I observe as a religion. This is my relationship with God. Now, of course, there's an institutionalized element to this, because as soon as people need to get to, it's a community thing, and so there's an organized element to that. But ultimately, it's about our relationship with God, a family of God's children relating to God the Father through Jesus Christ. That is the most wonderful experience I've ever had, and it's open for everyone.
Thanks for listening to Thrive Perspectives. We want to hear from you, so send us your big questions and ideas. Our home on the internet is thrivetoday.tv. You can contact us, download other shows, see all of our resources and much, much more at our website, thrivetoday.tv. The Thrive Today Network is on Facebook. Our Facebook page and links to our community groups are waiting for you. Just search and like Thrive Today page in Facebook now. Visiting the website ratethispodcast.com/Thrive Perspectives really helps us reach more people. So head to ratethispodcast.com/Thrive Perspectives. We hope that these shows will challenge you to look at life from a new perspective and thrive. This was another DJP.FM production.